let's discuss that story. The FTC approved the merger of two large ad agency giants. Josh, tell us about that.
Yeah, so two of the largest ad agencies, these are groups that basically control the advertisements you're going to see on news outlets and TV stations and all that stuff. One of them, Omnicom Group, is basically buying another of the major ones, which is Interpublic Group. And what this is going to create is like a super ad agency. The FTC has now approved the merger, but under an interesting condition, which is they cannot enter an agreement where they censor politically. And it's interesting because they're currently under investigation for doing just that. And also part of the arrangement with the FTC and the agreement to allow them to have this merger is they have to cooperate even further with the FTC to find out if they had in fact been making agreements to censor people politically.
But the problem I have with something like that is like you don't need a formal conspiracy written down in an email. I think a lot of these advertising agencies, I mean, you can check against their donations, but they're like any other big company, Silicon Valley company, like 95% Democrat. So you don't need like a formal conspiracy. They can just like shift the money away.
So this is where it gets complicated. So as part of the agreement to not censor people, yeah, as you mentioned, they just can't enter an agreement to do it. But they can do it individually. The businesses, part of the agencies, they can still request to have their ads withheld on certain news outlets if they just don't agree with the messaging or whatever. So all the systems of censorship are still there. And what had been established prior to this, which the FTC is currently investigating, you have these third-party organizations, some of which are operating in other countries. There's like NewsGuard and stuff like that. Some of them were getting foreign government money. And these organizations were making ratings for different news outlets, basically labeling people on partisan grounds. Are you a spreader of disinformation? Are you a spreader of radicalism? How do you define these things? Because, of course, you could argue that Trump just accused CNN and New York Times of spreading disinformation, right, about Iran. Who defines what disinformation is? And who defines what's radical? Some people say the new New York mayoral candidate's pretty dang radical. Does everybody agree with that? No. And so how do you define these things? The problem
or they do agree that it's radical and they say that's a good thing. So there's also that aspect.
And so you have certain organizations that make these definitions on partisan grounds. They excuse one side of the political aisle, but they label and go after the other side of the political aisle. And many have argued that's why you basically see most conservative news outlets, they're completely canceled by the ad agencies. And I mean, case in point, what advertisements do you see on your normal conservative news network? You see the pillows, there's gold,
coffee,
VPNs,
freedom water.
Freedom water.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm talking from experience here because I'm among the people who's demonetized, and I'm a humble gold merchant, but a humble gold merchant, of course. And this is the reality. And then you have guys like Alex Jones who just make their own products and sell bone broth and stuff like that because they're canceled by the ad agencies. They can't run a business because they're canceled by the system.
And just for the viewers, I'll give you a sort of a personal anecdote. I sold ads for a while for the Epoch Times, and it was like a very obvious known fact that all of the Asian ad agencies on the Chinese Epoch Times side, so we have like multiple languages, and here in New York, Chinese, English are the two.
We're blacklisted in China.
Main ones. So yeah. All the ad agencies that would have advertised in our publication, on the Chinese side, we got completely blacklisted. So there would be literally no ads, no Cartier, Tiffany, like any of the typical companies that would want to advertise to a Chinese audience were not allowed to advertise there. And because we share the same name with the Chinese publication, it went for the same state of affairs for the English side. And so there were a few instances where an ad agency, maybe it was like a new person, like an intern, they signed a contract with us for some ad deal. Within like a few hours or within like a day tops, we would get a phone call like, hey, sorry, this contract is void. Like, we're not doing this ad with you. And there were a couple of instances where the actual buyers talked with us, not the ad agency, but the buyer, the company. And they told us that basically they were pressured by through a network of how the pressure got to them. But it was someone in China saying, if you advertise with them, you're going to have difficulties selling in China, manufacturing in China, or just doing business in China.
Yeah,
and so,
we had a major car manufacturer tell us that.
Exactly. That was the instance I'm referring to. And so the point I'm making is that what that does to a media company, like as an example, the Epoch Times, we want to have a stance against the CCP and expose them. But then literally because of that, all of the ad revenue dries up. There's like no money. And so we have to like go to local restaurants and get ads. Instead of like being able to go to the big companies, we're like scrambling at the local sushi shop, selling them coupons in the paper. Hopefully they get enough return on investment.
We literally had to do because we couldn't survive otherwise.
Exactly. So just like there are real world repercussions to this sort of censorship. Like it actually does dry out real, real good journalism that goes against whoever controls the ad dollars.
Well, and it creates a problem then because, we're an example of that. It's hard to survive unless you play the game. Unless you censor yourself and you don't cover real news on China because you don't want the ad agencies to get canceled by China, you have to play the game, you have to toe the line, and people do it, and they make money off it, but then all the independent voices get shut down.
All right, so speaking of playing the game, you said it's hard to survive unless you play the game. So speaking of playing the game, one game that a lot of TV networks have been playing is accepting fat contracts from big pharmaceutical companies. What kind of game is that?
So the United States and New Zealand are the only countries on the face of the planet that allow direct-to-consumer advertising from pharmaceutical companies. And RFK Jr. is saying he wants to bring this to a big, hot end. He actually brought this up
America or New
last year.
Zealand?
America first. Okay. America first. We'll see about New Zealand after. Maybe New Zealand's going to get bombarded with these things afterwards because they'll be the last.
They can no longer advertise the halfling pipeweed.
Yeah, that's all they got going.
So during the pandemic, I interviewed Senator Ron Johnson. He was talking exactly about this. Here, we'll play a clip from that interview a few years ago and explains why it's an issue.
When drug companies were given the approval to start advertising, I think that was really their masterstroke of complete capture. You've seen the drug commercials. First of all, I have no idea what any of these. I'm not a doctor. They run these 60-second ads, advertising some drug for something. They never really tell you what because a lot of these conditions are probably pretty gross and they're not going to talk about them. So they're advertising a name brand drug. They're going through the list of side effects, including death and horrible things. What marketer would ever advertise like that? Basically, they're paying to tell the public how dangerous their drugs might potentially be. Why do they do it? Well, they do it because they're putting revenue into the pockets of media.
Aren't they also required to list all that information?
Well, of course they're required
this is the big part that's not, as Sydney pointed out. The big part is they're advertising, but if the media is getting the ads and the media is dependent on the ads for their survival, they cannot make them angry. They can't make those companies angry at them.
I understand what you're saying. So then you're going down the line of saying, oh, the pharmaceutical companies are giving them this money so they don't get the criticism. That's the background way of saying
well,
it,
and they're
right?
also the biggest lobbyists.
Yeah.
They pay for political lobbying, and so obviously they do have a game when it comes to regulations. They have a game when it comes to messaging. They have a game with it, and that does bring up, what they're basically allowing these companies to do leadership capture effectively.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, the point that Senator Johnson was making is these are terrible ads, right? You don't even know what the disease is, the product is. It's not really aimed at the consumer. You have to list all these horrible things.
Yeah,
they're just not good ads.
They cause suicidal thoughts or violent tendencies.
But the point,
but talk to your doctor if it's right for you. And you know what my favorite side effect is? They'll name, we'll make a fake drug, Zalambo. Be
careful, it might exist.
One of the side effects they say don't take if you're allergic to is Zalambo.
Well, I think like what he's describing is the opposite of what I described, which is it's the carrot and the stick. For us, we got the stick. We did the reporting and we didn't get the ad dollars because of it. On the flip side, that's the carrot approach. Hey, here's literally like 25% of your yearly ad budget from I won't say the drug company, but from this drug company. That's it. enjoy. And, and it's like, even if you don't say, or you don't have a policy in place, or you never write up an email saying, hey, we're not going to criticize this drug company, it's in the back of your mind that you're not going to criticize a certain company, or if a story comes to you that's critical of that company, you would say, okay, why don't we do a lot more research on it before we run it? Let's not just run it as a news story, which you might have done if they weren't paying you a lot of money.
And it's been known that business in general, media oftentimes avoids certain stories that will make advertisers mad. And that's just the way it is. And so the result of that is you see media skewing stories because there's financial incentives behind it.
Like with China.
Like with China, for probably the biggest example. And of course, even when it comes to independent media then trying to fight for their survival, what happens? Well, they want to have honest journalism. They want to not play that game. And then they can't make a business. They can't start a business. They get labeled, they get attacked, they get demonetized, the whole 9 yards. But what's actually interesting now is you do have outlets like this. Epoch Times, I think, and NTD being probably the two biggest examples of heavily canceled companies that are actually doing decently well, that have built alternative models, mainly funded by subscriptions, and with the subscriber models becoming big now, which you can't really cancel that easily. But what this means then is all the competition, if it's weighed like this, where you have individuals who are effectively operating in a denied environment and still relatively doing okay, and the competition is just getting every dollar in the bucket thrown at them, as soon as that valve gets shut off and you watch the playing field get balanced, the independent media are going to dominate, absolutely dominate. And I think there's a lot of people afraid of that right now.
Yeah, well, this would definitely push that reality, further along if TV networks are no longer allowed to accept pharmaceutical money. I mean, that would be probably you probably see actually shutdowns. Like maybe
for the business.
Yeah, maybe you'd have some of the huge networks, maybe CNN, maybe MSNBC would be able to survive, maybe. But even if you watch them, most of their ads are pharmaceutical. And they're probably paying top dollar. They're not probably paying remnant prices. Those are
and they're already struggling.
Right.
That's even without that, they're already struggling.
Right. So listen, if in the next, let's say, year, you're watching your favorite MSNBC program and suddenly they're advertising gold, just know they're not doing well financially. All right. Any closing thoughts on the subject?
About time, I'd say. Epoch Times, of course, we've been dealing with this for a long time. It's finally coming to the surface. In fact, going back to 2014, I was writing about this and exposing some of it.
Yeah, Josh wrote a story called "The Spy in the Ad Agency." It's funny. There's that meme, where the guy's he's in the gallows. He's got the noose around his neck, and he's looking at the other guy, going, "First time." That's what I feel like in this situation, where it's like we, as a media, the Epoch Times. I can only speak, from this experience. We were denied advertising dollars, so we had to create a whole separate type of business model. We were denied Google search results. Right, because Google wouldn't rank us, they'd demote us, they'd put authoritative news sources 10 pages above us. Even if you search the word Epoch Times, they still put the other media ahead of us. So we had to build out a whole different system. And now, of course, AI is making Google searches not lucrative for all the other media as well. So it's like all the steps we had to take out of necessity were actually made us very ahead of the curve and resistant to all the problems that actually wound up coming to these other media. It's
surviving because of the subscriptions of our viewers. So yeah, it's incredible.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, I know exactly what you're thinking. That was a great clip you just watched. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to follow and also check out either these videos or maybe they're on this side. I don't know which side they're on, but we set it up so these are the videos that YouTube is suggesting to you as the best ones that you'll probably like the most. So check them out. This side, and until next time.